Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Swell podcast. I'm Maya Mahoney, the social media manager here at McGraw, and today we are joined by Russ Scully, and he is the publisher at The Session magazine. And then we're here with Chip McGraw as well, the CEO and founder of McGraw. So I know you guys two know each other pretty well, but Russ, I don't know you, so if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick so those listening can get to meet you.
Great. Yeah. My name is Russ Scully. Grew up in New Jersey. Got really into surfing while I was living there. Kind of started a little bit late. I was like 15 or 16 years old. And then I had a couple of really good friends from high school who I didn't have a house near the shore. I was like an hour away from the Jersey Shore where I live. But my two friends both had houses down there. And I was fortunate enough to kind of get really tight with those two guys. Their names are Ted Benedict, who we called Eggs, and this guy Tom Williams. And the three of us did a lot of surfing along the Jersey Shore in the years of sort of like ninth grade through our senior year in high school. So much so that then we basically said, listen, we all had plans to go to college. And then after college, we all said, listen, as soon as we get out of school, we're going to head to a place that has better waves. So we all sort of made that pact. During the college years, I fell in love with my wife, Roxanne. So when the time came for us to head west to the West Coast, she joined us, and then the four of us ended up renting a house and living in Santa Barbara from 1991 to 97, and did a whole lot of surfing there, and really got introduced and really kind of fell into the whole West Coast, particularly Southern California surf culture, which was awesome. And anyway, and then the short version is, but now I live in Burlington, Vermont, and so shortly after Roxanne and I got engaged, we headed back east for all the reasons that people do that, mostly because of the draw of family and so on. And we looked around at where we wanted to live. We knew we needed to be in the Northeast, didn't want to live in a big city. I had some Vermont roots because I learned to snowboard there, so we thought it'd be really fun to move to Burlington, which even today is still one of those cities that shows up on those frequent lists of really fun lifestyle towns to work and play. So we thought, hey, this would be a cool place to live. Burlington is really where all the action in the small state of Vermont happens, so I felt like, hey, this is a great place to really kind of continue a career, or at least, make sure we have a great opportunity to find some work to do, because otherwise other parts of the state are pretty rural. And so we've been there ever since. I've been in Vermont for about 25 years, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've started a lot of businesses in Burlington. Everything from like web agency work, which I still do today, to starting a small restaurant with a very surfy theme called The Spot, followed by a water sport retail surf shop called Wind and Waves, where we sell surf, windsurf, kite, wing, foil, all kinds of stuff that's kind of feed our whole sort of passion addiction to water sports. And and most recently we've launched this really interesting startup incubator space in an old oven factory on the shores of Lake Champlain. It's a 14-acre site, so it's a big area right on Lake Champlain, in a old brick building structure that's 150,000 square feet in size, where we host a number of technology startup companies, and that's called Hula. And that's kind of the most recent thing we've been doing.
Yeah, sounds like you're a man of many traits, and you wear many hats, so I bet that's a lot to juggle.
Yeah, we're keeping busy, and everyone always asks me, like, how do you, and Chip is kind of like falls into the same sort of category, but how do you manage so many different things? And I always joke it's like a little bit of ADD kind of. Mm-hmm. It plays a little bit of an ADD, right? Because I never saw myself as a really great operator. Mm-hmm. I was like, I really enjoyed like getting things started. I'm a great startup guy. And then I love to find operators to run it so that ultimately you can go on to the next thing and the next thing. Yeah. And that's the secret to the success of that kind of methodology. Is you got to find really awesome people who are passionate operators, who love what you're doing, connect with you on like a personal and professional level, who you really trust are going to run this thing as if they own it, and you give them a lot of control, right? So they basically have the benefit of running it like an owner without any of the burden of being, without any of the burdenship of ownership, right? It's like the payroll and finance and all that stuff. So finding key people to run it each new endeavor is really kind of the secret sauce, and if you can do that, then it kind of frees you up to do something else.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's very, very in line with my craziness as well. It's like create these things, love being the creator, love being the idea guy, putting it together. But yeah, definitely have to have those key people to run everything, right? Putting people in place. And people always ask me, like, how do you do it? Well, in this business, this person is the person that's running everything. And this one, this person's in. And over here, this person. And so, like you said, you have to give the control up. You got to give them a lot of a runway.
Yeah.
Not micromanaging.
Yeah.
Putting people in place that you can trust to do the right thing and that has the same vision. So I think that's fantastic.
You have to be really good at letting go.
Yeah.
And I think that's a hard thing for founders to do, honestly, especially when it's their baby, right? We call it dropping the baby.
Right.
You have to be able to let go, and you have to be able to entrust someone else to run it the way you would run it, which it sounds much easier than it is to do.
Absolutely.
But if you can do that, it becomes particularly easy if you've got this other shiny object that's kind of drawing your attention away from that thing anyway.
Right.
Which, I mean, it's
That's
like kids.
not
It's like
chasing the
kids.
shiny objects, right?
You love them all. You love them all the same, right? The thing I always
Right.
worry about is I never want anyone in any of these organizations to feel like, oh, Russ lost interest in this and he started doing something else. It's
Right.
like, I love them all equally, It's just, there's another one now that needs our attention. So you just sort of like, you have to spread the love out as much as you can. And then at some point you hit a capacity where you're like, Roxanne's famous for saying like, no more new stuff, okay? No more new stuff. And I'm always like, yeah, this is my wife, right? So I promise her every time, like, we're done after this. I swear, we're done after this. No more after this one.
It's so fun.
It's so fun. It's so fun. Particularly when she's excited about it too. Like if I can get her on board, then it works so much better.
Yeah.
Then you're golden.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Russ, it's funny. We met in Nicaragua about last September, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. September. Location to remain otherwise anonymous, but we had a great time. We foiled. You were already
Awesome.
really advanced going foiling, kicking butt foiling. I was a total newbie.
That's nice of you. I don't know if I was that advanced, but that was nice of you.
you were
Yeah.
ripping. You
Were those the videos of you crashing?
Yeah, I mean, I was crashing a lot. I took a lot of waves on the head.
I didn't see you crash that much.
Oh,
honestly.
man.
I think I made a reel of you just crashing, like a blooper reel.
There's crashes. I might have gotten concussed a little bit, but a few times. But anyway, guys, we kept going on. It was really fun meeting you and like your son and your nephew and the whole crew. It was a great time, and I think we do share a very similar journey from that as an entrepreneur. I also really didn't start surfing until I was 15.
Yeah.
15. That whole high school just had tried to surf as much as I could. Also met my wife at college. Similar, we left and went to Costa Rica to follow that dream.
Yeah.
Drawn back here to the East Coast later,
Right,
kids,
right.
family, all that. It's very similar.
You guys even have the same hair.
And I think we both like to
haircut.
and we both like to chase shiny objects. Our wives
yeah,
constantly
yeah.
telling us to calm down
Yeah.
on that. And I think we have a very similar way that we run our lives and businesses and following our passions. So it's great to have met someone like you and,
Likewise.
and like a lot of synergies. And I just wanted to give you kudos on this magazine, on the Sessions magazine. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to write in here.
Thanks for doing it.
It was actually super enjoyable.
Right.
I have never really written. I always was a person who liked to write.
Yeah.
I went to a.
You just need an assignment and a deadline.
Yeah, I mean, I had my mother was an English teacher, had a degree in English, and hammered into us, the King's English about.
Yeah.
That was always her saying, you can't say that. That's wrong. And then she was a writer. She was a publisher, as well, but more in education and textbooks. But
Really?
I did have some training in writing early on, but it's been a long time since I ever really did much with it. But I always had a passion for it, so I really, really enjoyed doing it.
Great.
It was hard to get it out and make it happen, but I didn't want to let you down.
You were awesome. You were awesome. You did a great job. No, when we met in Nicaragua, I was like, wow, this guy's got a lot going on. I definitely saw a lot of similarities, and it was kind of like really intrigued to understand sort of how you were doing it, what I could learn from you, and sort of like managing all this stuff while still pursuing like really fun surf trips once in a while when you can like figure out how to carve the time out to do that. And yeah, going back to that trip for a second, that was unreal. I mean, it was a bucket list trip, and I shared the story with you, but thank you, Liam Stroback and Chuck Patterson, who kind of invited us last minute. Liam is good friends with James Jenkins, who's Lance's business partner there. They know each other through real kiteboarding in Hatteras. So Liam was at our house, that like only 3 weeks before this trip or something like that, a short period of time.
Last minute.
I was like, Liam, what are you up to? He's like, I'm going to Nicaragua to foil surf with James Jenkins. I was like, when are you doing that? Yeah. So anyway, he's like, yeah, and I'm going with Chuck. So I called Chuck. I'm like, what's going on here? Anyway, it was amazing. Great to meet Lance. Really fun to spend that time with James and the whole crew and meet you. And Rob Felder, Rob Felder, who was with us as well. And anyway, so yeah, after talking to you for a little while, I was like, wow, this guy has a lot of stuff going on. It'd be really fun to tap his brain and figure out a little bit more about what he's up to, what he's doing, how he's like even managing all that. So anyway, kudos to you for figuring it out. And yeah, that was an awesome bucket list experience.
Great trip, and we've got to put together another one.
Yeah,
somewhere.
I'm ready. I mean, we could repeat or do something different, but
I'm definitely going to be back in Nicaragua. I mean, I'm going to be there for the month of July, hopefully, with my family. And I don't think that those guys have anything planned for that month with foiling specifically, but I'm going to definitely try to hijack the jet ski.
Well, the next year I went down to Nosara, so you've probably been there.
Yeah, well, I used to live in Nosara.
There you go.
I don't know if you remember that, but I lived in Nosara for 6 years.
Yeah.
And owned Coldwell Banker franchise there.
No, that's right.
So I developed a bunch of real estate, built houses. So that was my first my first business. Was when I was in my early 20s, moved to Costa Rica with my wife. My oldest son, Fitz, she's 21. He was a baby.
Yeah.
And we moved there. My second son and third son were born while we lived there. We were pregnant with my daughter when we left Costa Rica. But, it was a great time in Nosara. So you were over there. Were you there with Eric?
I was there with a group from Hula, actually.
Okay, a group from Hula.
And, it was actually really interesting because I met a guy there named Josh Waitskin. Have you ever heard of this guy?
I don't know Josh, no.
Okay, so Josh Waitskin, and I hope I'm not spoiling Josh Waitskin's story here, but Josh Waitskin was the world chess champion at like age 9.
Okay.
We'll have to fact check all this, but In Search of Bobby Fischer was a movie that was made about him.
Really?
He's kind of, and then he wrote this book called The Art of Mastery. Again, we got to double check all this stuff. I think it's called The Art of Mastery, and he's basically a guy who became obsessed with mastering whatever passion it was that he had at the time. And as a young kid, he was a master chess champion. He became world chess champion at age 9. They made a movie about this called In Search of Bobby Fischer.
I've seen the movie.
So, but what's wild, the reason I'm telling you all this is because so after that, he decides, he got really into martial arts. And he became the world champion at Taekwondo push hands, which I didn't even know there was such a thing, right? But
never heard of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, he became world champion from chess to martial arts.
Wow.
Right. I mean, just think about the breadth of it.
He can do it all.
now, anyway, what I'm going to fast forward to, now he's super into foiling. Well, he got really into foiling right at the beginning. Mm-hmm. I'm going to say like 10 or 15 years ago, right? He got really, really into foiling. And he's been down in Costa Rica, pretty much lives there in Nosara, pretty much full time. And he's got his own wild R&D lab down there. So we went into his place. He's got beautiful jet ski setups and stuff, and he goes out to this point where I can't even talk about that. He kind of, and we were tow foiling down there again. The waves were much smaller. I mean, obviously they do get bigger, but when we were there, they weren't like we scored in that other secrets place in Nicaragua. The waves there were incredible. And when I went to Nosara, I was like, wow, I wonder what we're going to see in terms of difference in terms of this break versus that break. Anyway, Josh took us out. He was super generous with us and took us out to this amazing little point, and we ended up tow foiling there. And he is just so knowledgeable to a point that it's beyond obsession. But he's an expert at identifying every different brand of foil and which one does what and what you can do to modify each one to make it do whatever it is you want it to do. Mm-hmm. So just showing up at his house, imagine there's just like racks of different foil wings, and he's just like, okay, you want this one and that one, and you want to pair this with this, and put that. Have you tried that tail on this one? And he's done it all. And anyway, so that was fun. That was my next trip down there, and it was wild because That was in November.
In November.
Yeah, so it was a year after our trip.
Uh-huh.
It was a year after our trip. Wait, is that right? No, it was a
Right
couple months.
after, yeah.
A couple months.
Yeah.
So it was weird. It felt surreal. I was flying back into Liberia, and instead of heading north, we were heading
South.
west,
Uh-huh.
and a little southwest, whatever, to Nosara. And this guy named Chris Begg has an amazing setup out there. He's a water guy who grew up in the Northeast, and he's an investor who's like, he's very niche investor guy who does a lot of research into whatever it is he wants to focus on, but he's a water guy. And anyway, he's kind of got the pull to go to Nosara. He's been over there for a while with his wife, Steph, and they've built a little incubator. They have a little startup incubator there and a little hotel that they built. And anyway, he's good friends with Josh. So this guy, Chris Begg, introduced me to Josh, and the three of us did a bunch of toefoiling in there.
Very cool.
Yeah, so anyway, but
I
I
have to go back and visit. I haven't been to Nosara for a few years, probably been 2 or 3 years. During COVID, we went down there, visit some friends and surf. And I know which points you're talking about.
Yep.
And you know, for years, no one really did anything out there. There was some guys that started doing some stand-up paddleboard stuff out there, and then everybody kind of was surfing those spots in the right places. So look, tell us more about Sessions Magazine. I know you did a rebrand recently.
Yep.
You know, so what's the thought here process with that? I mean, it's a beautiful publication.
Thank you. Yeah.
You know, print, I think, is obviously been going through some trouble. You know, a lot of magazines didn't make it. Even some of the ones that have been around forever haven't made it.
Silly idea, right?
You know,
Why
so.
would you get into print?
But I, you know, myself and we had Mark Sawyer Chu, a friend of mine, on the show not too long ago, and you know he was with Surfer and other publications. Then went to the digital stuff, and we were talking a lot about print, coincidentally, and you know, in our business too, you know, we do a lot of digital marketing stuff, but we also supply a lot of data and different services around direct marketing. And we've seen a resurgence of mail, of actually like direct mail for marketing lately, because it's, you know, all these digital channels have been saturated. There's a lot of regulations also coming out, new regulations about, you know, opt-ins and how you contact people. And, you know, GDPR in Europe, much more stringent than our regulations here when it comes to email, phone, the way you contact, how you use data. You know, what constitutes as an opt-in. Canada is also a lot more stringent, and things are moving in a way here in the U.S. that is more like consumer protection oriented and people's privacy and their information. So we have seen a lot more people going out marketing from a direct mail standpoint and having success with it. And might be also during COVID a lot more people at home, so they were getting their mail, looking at it. So who knows the reason why, but you know, obviously print, you know, magazines and other publications have had a difficult time, but it's a beautiful publication. I just want to know, like, what was the motivation behind doing it, other than it's just really cool and fun. But like, you know, so what can you tell us about it, and why what was the change from the name change and things like that?
So there's a lot to cover there, but that's a great intro. So Clay Feeder was the guy who originally started publishing this magazine, and he was publishing a windsurfing title for a long time. And I think it's 2008 he started Stand Up, Surf, and Sail, which was the original title of this magazine. And so it had a little bit of windsurfing, no kiting, but it had like windsurfing and a little bit of stand-up paddling, just as stand-up paddling was starting to happen. And he obviously was following the gold standard of surf publications, which is the Surfer's Journal. So we actually had a contract to have this magazine printed at the same printer in China where Surfer's Journal is printed, and he was basically following the exact same format. He loved that. And you know, these are my words, not him. I haven't talked to him about that, but we knew that when we sort of picked up this publication from him. We understood, we knew all of his suppliers, where he was getting it printed, and all that, and we understood he was following the success and the feel, the quality of the Surface Journal. And so and then what happened is he ended up, the magazine, the stand-up journal was growing at about the same rate as the growth of stand-up paddling. Stand-up paddling was one of like the fastest growing water sports for a long time there, right? And
it was.
And he had this magazine, and so the magazine was just getting thicker and thicker and thicker with each issue, and the sport was really growing. And then he saw the need to bring on some additional help. So he hired our friend Evelyn O'Doherty, who lives in Montauk, as his associate publisher. And the day that she joined the Stand Up Journal magazine, Clay turned to her and said, "One day I'm going to groom you so that you can take this over from me." And so she kind of had that in the back of her head from the day that she started. And I was advertising actually in Stand Up Journal for Wind and Waves and for Villa Playa Maria, which is our retreat space down in Puerto Rico. Right. So I knew Clay, and so he reached out to a few of us who just, when he was going through the candidates for the associate publisher's job, he asked me about Evelyn. I was like, "I know Evelyn, she's great. You should definitely hire her." He heard the same thing from a number of other people, and he ended up hiring her. So Evelyn came and told me, like, "Hey, I'm now working at this magazine," and I said, "Oh my God," because historically, I've always been a print fan. I love print. Like every surfer has a dream of becoming a graphic designer. Well, I was an art major in school, and when I was out in Santa Barbara, I was actually working for a printer out there doing desktop publishing, right when desktop publishing was all just going digital. So it was like this awesome space where Apple and Macintosh computers were all just starting to come out with all this software. I was taking night classes at UCSB, learning Quark Express and Photoshop and Illustrator and all these software tools that were designed for desktop publishing. And I got really into it. And then I was doing it, and then at one point I even looked back and thought, wow, this could be like a career move for me, because at that point I was just doing odds and end jobs, just trying to pay the bills. But now I like latched onto this thing, desktop publishing. I was working in this print shop. I was watching the whole industry really taking shape and going, this is super fun. I mean, the first time I was having fun at work. I was loving it. The third person in this magazine effort with us is my friend Jeff Henderson. And Jeff and I have like sort of very similar paths. We met in Vermont, but he's a water sport guy as well. Really went to the Rhode Island School of Design, very print background. We both ended up becoming partners in web agencies. I mean, Burlington's a small town, right? But we both ended up being partners in web agencies with the founders of those web agencies.
Unreal.
Yeah, and we were competing with each other for business, and we were both kind of building bigger and bigger websites, and we ended up both leaving after we both spent about, I'm going to say, I think it was like 6 years there. I spent 6 years there. I started this agency in 2000, merged with this other agency in 2003, and then 6 years later in 2009, I was kind of done with the hamster wheel. So the short story is essentially that Jeff and I both had this amazing print background, and I even like used to. So when we both left the web agency world, I just started Wind and Waves, and we had this little back office, similar to what you guys have here. We had this little back office area behind the surf shop. You'd have to walk through the surf shop to get to this back room, and back there I was still building websites and doing stuff like that. Jeff had left his agency, and he was going back into the freelance market. So I was like, don't go back to your kitchen table, man. Just come in here. We'll pull up a desk for you. You can play around and do some surf stuff with us. So he did that, and then that grew into all kinds of opportunities, obviously, because the two of us were in that space together, doing a lot of fun, creative projects together. Awesome. And I used to elbow him and be like, you should contact this guy, Clay Feeder, because he's got this cool magazine that seems like it's doing really well. And honestly, I think it'd be, I think he could use a little design help. Like, I think he's doing great with what he's doing. But I was like, Jeff is so talented. He's like an amazing designer that I was like, hey, this could be kind of fun. So when Evelyn called us that day and said, hey, I just took the job as associate publisher, I raised my hand. I was like, if you ever need any help with this thing, please know that Jeff and I would love to work on a print project in a content category that we're actually really passionate about, right? Because I used to churn out all kinds of print stuff back in the desktop publishing days of just content that I didn't really care about. Sure. I was just numb to it. It was a great, it was a really fun job, but none of the magazine titles or anything were anything that interests me. So the idea of working on a surf magazine was something we thought would be insanely fun. So Evelyn ended up buying the magazine from Clay and taking over as publisher.
Okay, gotcha.
That's what happened. So Evelyn took over. Clay passed the torch to Evelyn, and then Evelyn has run it since 2019.
Gotcha.
And the day that she took the torch, she was like, okay, I'm calling in on that offer you put out there. I was like, you and Jeff are going to help me with this. So three of us banded together, and we kind of we just picked up where Clay left off and continued that title for from 2019 until just recently, right? So like 3 years or something. It's a quarterly magazine. We did about 12 to 14 issues, something like that. And then I could tell Evelyn was like, it's a lot. It's a lot for one person. It's an independent magazine. You don't have this like big media organization with lots of different titles where you can just spread around, economies of scale and all kinds of things. So I could tell, at some point I knew that it was a lot of work for her, and she bit off a lot. So I told her at one point, I said, listen, if you ever are feeling exhausted from this job, come and talk to me, and because we have some options here. There's some things that we could do. So she did. She came in, she waved a flag, she just was like, this is exhausting. I was like, why don't we do this? What if we switched roles, right? We'll take you on as our managing editor, and I'll take on the publishing role, and that way we'll set you up with, you're going to keep doing your same job, but you won't have all the other extraneous responsibilities of being the publisher and managing all the other stuff. She's like, awesome. So I said, before you answer, I want you to know, in full transparency, if I take it on, I'm going to want to consider a name change. And she was widely open to it. And that's when we said, and that's when we really put our heads down and we said, we got to be responsible about this. There's a whole readership, and there's a whole audience out there that we don't want to alienate. We certainly don't want them to feel like we've left them.
Right.
So we have to be really careful. But at the same time, we all knew that there's niche markets, right? And then there's opportunities to kind of like broaden the market in some cases when you need to. And so stand-up paddling did this like bell curve thing that took off. And then right around the time it was like leveling off or whatever, and that's all debatable. But regardless, we just didn't feel like it made sense for us to be hyper-focused on one sport.
Sure, yeah.
Right? Particularly when like the Kai Lennys of the world were starting to emerge, and this idea of being a well-rounded water person, right? Waterman, waterwoman, whatever, was becoming more and more popular. We're like, and then there's foiling. And so we had a couple audiences to consider, our readership and our advertisers. And what was interesting is the advertisers had already made the change, right? So Nash, for instance, started sending us winging ads instead of stand-up paddling ads, or foiling ads instead of stand-up paddling. So we knew that we had some acceptance there, and we knew that some of them were already starting to make that shift. And so the fun part was just diving into the exploration of any kind of name change. Like, as you know, it's hard. It's hard. Yeah. Come up with a million ideas. The worst thing you want to do, not the worst thing, but one thing you got to be careful of is starting to ask a lot of opinions from other people.
Sure.
Because then they're like, oh, you should call it this, or you should call it that, and then you never want to get into that game where you're just throwing stuff up on the wall and just seeing like what resonates with people. So it had to be thoughtful. We had to really take our time. We had to, really make sure we were doing it for the right reasons, and we had to be careful not to essentially go and say,
well,
we got one shot at it.
I think you hit it right with the sessions, right? Because it doesn't matter whether you're paddle surfing, paddle boarding, kite boarding, any variation of foiling. There's a lot of variations of foiling, right? You can foil on a sup, you can foil with a wing, you can foil with a kite, you can toe foil, you can prone foil, you can foil behind.
We should have called it foiling.
Yeah, you can foil behind a boat and wake foiling.
Yeah.
Right, there's a million variations of that. There's surfing, there's windsurfing, and anything else I missed there. But every time you're doing it, like you're doing a session, right? It's all referred to the same. So I think that was a brilliant idea, and I think it bodes well, as you said, for the waterman, the water person, water woman, whatever you want to call it. But and it is true, well-rounded. I mean, like I started out early water skiing because I lived on lakes in Central Florida. My grandma lived at the beach. So then it was like, how do we ride waves? And it's figuring out different ways there. And then it's even like going to California when I was young and grabbing lunch trays and at the wedge, whatever you could do to ride something, right? And then, continue that progression, foiling. I did stand-up paddleboard for a while too. Was big into that for a minute. And still enjoy it, but, it's... I longboard, I shortboard, foilboard, picking that up. Last week I went and did some foiling behind a boat. That was fun, good practice.
Yeah, we got to get you winging now. You need a wind sport.
Man, I still got to get. I know. I do need that. I'm gonna have to come to your neck of the woods to learn how to do that. Here we have a great period of time here in St. Augustine, Northeast Florida. Basically, like that September, like more towards October, November. Yeah. We get a lot of nice wind. Yeah. And really good for downwind type of sessions. There's a lot of guys here that started kiting. But I never really got into the kiting just because of the fear of all that gear.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot of time spent with gear. But the
Yeah.
wing makes a lot more sense. It's faster to get it together. Just boom, pop it up, pump it, go. We definitely have the wind here. But I'm still trying to get a little bit better at the actual foiling.
Yeah.
It's gradual because I still love surfing. So it's
You're
like hard
doing
to like
You're doing great on the
hard
foil.
to switch those days where like, do I really want to foil today or do I just want to surf?
Well, the days where it's windy and there's no waves,
Yeah.
that's when you're going to start winging.
Winging, yeah.
And
So,
you spend
yeah.
so much time foiling,
Yeah.
right? So even Laird Hamilton said he's like the best pilots are the ones who spend the most time flying.
Yeah.
So winging allows you to foil
Yeah.
for hours,
Yeah.
And if there are no
true.
waves and it's windy, and you become really proficient foiling if you're wing foiling. So
Yeah, it's another level.
yeah,
I got to get into it. I did some sailing as a kid, but I never got into the sailboarding and the windsurfing. I've never done it really ever.
yeah. Well, that's
So-
what happened when I moved to Vermont. So I moved to Vermont in '97, right, and then discovered Lake Champlain. Didn't really understand sort of the magnitude of that lake. It's huge. It's the
Yeah.
sixth largest lake in the country.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it separates Vermont from New York State. So anyway, I'd always been kind of intrigued with windsurfing, and then when we moved to Vermont, that's when I realized, like, all right, now is the time. I'm gonna figure this sport out, and it was self-taught, beating your head against the wall for a while, just getting annihilated, and then until it finally clicked, and then what was fun was just being in the progression of the sequence of all the wind sports that evolved after that. So I learned to windsurf just in time to get proficient enough windsurfing, and then kiting happened.
Yep.
And then that's when everyone was like, whoa, this looks interesting. So then I got into kiting very early on, which was great. And then foiling kind of came out of that because we did a lot of kite foiling because all of a sudden it's like, I'd love to kite today, but it's a little bit too light. But if you
Right.
throw a foil on your board, now all of a sudden you
do
can go out. Right. So there was this natural progression. And at that point, and like we said, stand-up paddle foil surfing, which is a mouthful, but stand-up paddle foil surfing was
And with
one
a
of the
wing.
easiest. It was Chuck Patterson and I did that a ton in Puerto Rico, and I got
Uh-huh.
and I just fell in love with that. That's all I wanted to do for a while, and it really helped. It really helped like get comfortable with catching waves on a foil, because I already had done a lot of stand-up paddle surfing, so I was really comfortable on a paddleboard catching waves. Adding a foil to it was one extra step, and then once I was really proficient with that, now I feel like I can foil, and then the wing thing came up. And it just seemed like this natural progression. Again, if you were sort of already kind of on that path, all these sports were kind of falling into place at the right time in logical order, and then that was fantastic because now if you already knew how to foil and then the wing shows up, you already have like a kiting and windsurfing background. It's like this sport looked amazing. Going back to this title change for one other quick second is like and you guys deal with this a lot as well, but the other thing obviously it allowed us to broaden our audience, right? So now we were sport agnostic. We were trying to think of this as being like a sport agnostic approach where we had a wider advertising market now, we had a wider readership market now, and so by basically expanding on that, and the downside is like, well, you can't be too general because now you're just plain vague. But I think that we timed it well enough with sort of like we were saying with this popularity around people who are doing more than one sport anyway, that it kind of fell into this category. And anyway, so that's been really fun.
Yeah, you said, you widened your audience whenever you guys did the name change. So I'm curious, how do you, promote this sense of community? What are some things that you're doing at Session Magazine to do that? I know that you guys started a podcast as well whenever I was doing some research, but
Nice.
yeah, if you can just speak on the role of community and how that relates to your magazine.
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the communities we wanted to touch on, honestly, and Chip and I talked about this a little bit before we started the show, but we've gotten really involved with connecting with ocean conservation groups, groups that are really focused on sort of the health of the oceans. And we do that through a conference that we hold up at Hula twice a year in March and September called Sea Change Sessions. And one of the focus topics during that event is around ocean conservation companies and NGOs, nonprofits that are doing work to help clean up the oceans. And so we've met a lot of amazing groups doing some amazing work. I was telling Chip just before here, I was down in Key Largo 2 days ago. I was down there for 3 days with a guy named Ken Niedermeyer, who's regrowing elkhorn coral reefs down there along the Florida Keys. And I met him through Sea Change, through this conference, in our search for finding different nonprofit groups in this community of ocean conservationists who were doing amazing things to help preserve all this water access that all of us have the privilege to be able to get into every day. So anyways, it was fantastic to meet them. In doing so, we were able to extend exposure through the magazine. So a lot of the ads actually in the magazine are ocean conservation groups that we've met through Sea Change, who were basically just, gifting ads to in order to help just raise awareness and increase exposure and do all the stuff that we need to do to help them be successful.
Yeah, I think that's important to have a cause that you care about, especially, being a water sports magazine. You're in the water all day, so we have to protect our oceans and sea life. And absolutely. I think, print publications and online publications give a great platform to bring awareness. And so, yeah, that's a good initiative on your guys' part for sure. So
yeah, and I do feel like, when we started Windy Wave, I always joke with people, like, it was for someone like me, it was like backdoor access to all these amazing athletes. Mm-hmm. And so the community has only grown as a result of, that's how I met Chuck Patterson. That's how I met a lot of the people that I got to spend a lot of time with who were doing this stuff for a living. And now through Sea Change, I feel like the doors opened up even wider. And so we had this group. We had Parlay for the Oceans down in Puerto Rico with us for a week. They brought Frank Solomon, Greg Knoll, a couple of other surfers down there who are also doing like amazing work trying to, clean the oceans, trying to deal with the plastics problem. But again, it's this extended community of athletes, ambassadors, influencers, who are all they're all pulling in the same direction. They're all doing the same kind of work, and this gives us a platform to be able to recognize them, celebrate them, and increase their exposure.
Right, and everyone has a story too. So
yeah, it's a great initiative. Mm-hmm. Amazing. Now you've mentioned Hula a couple times we've been talking here, mm-hmm. and I understand it's kind of like an incubator for startups. How did that come about? Why Hula? What's the name mean?
Yeah.
You talked about you acquired this building and all that space, but what what's the motivation behind that?
Yeah. So good question. I got really involved with the Burlington Business Association. One of the things that happens as an entrepreneur, right, is like you realize how challenging small business is.
Absolutely.
It's hard.
So hard.
It's tough to do this. It looks easy when you're doing it well. And from an outside perspective, it's like, oh, that looks pretty simple. There's a lot of stuff that fails, and it's continually challenging. And then I really recognized that when I really got involved with the Business Association in Burlington, and one of the things that I thought would be really interesting would be to help create some like workforce stability. We're a very small little economic center in the middle of a small, in the northern part of a very small state, right? I wanted to de-risk the problem that a lot of these small areas have, which is you get one or two large employers that come in and employ a lot of people, but if any one of them were to get acquired or have any interest in leaving the state or going somewhere else,
of people get laid off.
There's a lot. Yeah. So how do you de-risk that? Well, you need to grow a lot of businesses, and so the way to do that is you got to incubate a lot of startups. And at the time, we thought it would be a good idea to really incubate some technology groups because we felt like they're raising money, they're hiring a lot of people really quickly, and it seems like obviously that's at the time, that's a direction that seemed to be like a good bet, right? Mm-hmm. So this space came online. It was right on the water. My attraction to it obviously was like the beachfront there is incredible, as you'll see when you come and visit. But I always thought like, hey, with wind and waves and all the stuff that we were doing on Lake Champlain, this property has some of the most amazing access to the lake. It really does. It's beautiful. And it's sandwiched between Lake Champlain and the city's bike path. So everybody who rides their bike down the bike path comes across this property, staring out at the water and going, And it was private. It was owned by the Blodgett Oven Company, which if you've ever been to a pizza place and seen them pull that handle and pull your pizza,
Okay.
virtually all of those ovens are made by Blodgett. They were making 200 ovens a day out of this place. And
Holy cow.
and they're still very successful, doing really well. They had just outgrown this building. It's an old post-industrial brick and steel thing, and they needed something more modern. They're like, we
Right.
finally got to the point where we got to modernize, or or we were just losing. There's too many inefficiencies in this building. So that's a long story. I won't take you through, but you can read all about it on the Hula blog.
Okay.
But the purchase and acquisition of that property was pretty wild. But eventually we got it, and then we went through a big renovation that happened during COVID. Thankfully, all that went pretty well. And then boom, we come out with this shiny new building that has. And I always felt like, hey, on the commercial real estate side, right? It's location, location, location.
Yeah, man, probably these guys, when they built this oven factory there,
Yeah.
on this beautiful lake, they weren't
No
even
idea.
thinking about that. They're just like, it's some property in the middle of nowhere, it's cheap.
They had no idea. They're like, why does this need to be on Lake Champlain? It really doesn't. It really doesn't. But it was gorgeous. And there was a lot of tears when the company left, because these people had, they had this gorgeous place for a long time, and
Yeah.
they were finally having to leave. But it was great. My business partner there, right? We talked about having key people in all these places to run all this stuff.
Yep.
But this, I shocked a lot of people up in that area when we bought this property, because it was expensive, and it was, it was a fairly risky move. So people came out of the woodwork being like, who is this guy? I thought he owned a restaurant and a surf shop, which was true at the time.
Right.
And it still is true. But, I think it threw them off a little bit. But one of the guys who came out of the woodwork was this financial analyst guy named Rob Lair, who was working for Morgan Stanley. And he and I had 2 or 3 breakfasts at the Spot, our little restaurant there.
Mm-hmm.
And like on the last breakfast, he said, hey, I want to leave my job and do this with you. And so that guy helped me. Now I had someone else to sit down and think this through with. So it wasn't just me and Roxanne going, are you sure? Are you sure? She thought I was crazy doing this whole thing, by the way. Like, on the record, poor Roxanne went through a lot of headaches when we ended up doing this project, because there was not a ton of confidence at the beginning that I was going to be able to pull this off by myself. So thank God for Rob Lair. Rob Lair came in at the perfect time, right at the beginning, and he was a guy who really allowed me to bounce a lot of the ideas off of. And said, like, absolutely, we're right on target here. Boom, 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 let's do this. And then he's the guy who brought this idea of, hey, with all these technology companies raising money, we should get the community back. We should get the community involved. And as they're raising money, we should pull from some people who want to participate and essentially build an investor pool.
Gotcha.
And now you've created something that really it's really grounded.
Mm-hmm.
So what was amazing is we catalyzed all this investment activity, this startup investment activity, which before then was a lot of word of mouth. There were some amazing small groups who were already kind of doing this on a little bit of a smaller scale, but a lot of it was word of mouth. It was like, it's like a friend of yours coming to you and be like, hey, there's this surfboard company that's interested, that's raising some money, you want to participate. And
Right.
the only way you know that is if somebody was telling you about it. Well, everything that we're doing up there is Vermont focused. So we're only investing in Vermont companies. All of our co-investors are people generally older than me, or way more savvy than me, who have been doing this for a long time. They're just excited that I sort of planted the seed, put the stake in the ground, and then created the brick and mortar physical space for them all to convene. And it's one-stop shopping. So now they're roaming the halls every day, and they're talking to Rob Lair, and they're talking to founders, and they're getting caught up on all the new stuff that's happening with all these companies, talking about burn rates, talking about next raises, talking about key hires, strategic partners, all this stuff.
Phenomenal, man.
Yeah.
What a great thing. What a great opportunity for a startup or someone to do their business, and having all those resources and everything right there. It would be amazing to be able to participate in that. It would be phenomenal.
Yeah, and anytime you want to, you can just go outside and pump up a wing or a kite and get out on the lake and
Shoot out there.
yeah, do a little foiling.
Man,
Yeah,
it's a rough life.
it can be a little distracting.
Rough sounds like a rough time at Hula.
It's a rough time to Hula.
You got a place to start your business. You got great people to help you, resources. You got capital,
Yeah,
and you can enjoy the outdoors right there behind the place.
it's spoiling, right?
Man,
It's
that's
spoiling. Doesn't
So
seem
what
fair.
is and so how? I mean, are you guys participating in the equity of these things? I mean, how does the monetization of all this work? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, we do. I mean, I'm a fortunate guy. That's another long story, but I'm a fortunate guy. My dad, my quick story is like my dad was a self-made man. He did an amazing job. He grew up in Manhattan, He didn't come from much, but he was a numbers guy. Ended up working on Wall Street. He was an investor, and he ended up identifying this small biotechnology company very early on in the cancer space and oncology, dealing with a specific blood cancer called multiple myeloma.
Okay.
And he was an early investor. So like all the way back in the Santa Barbara days, Roxanne and I would open the paper and we'd see like, hey, the stock moved like an eighth of a penny. There's like no volume very early on, but for whatever reason, my dad loved this company, and ended up doing really well. And then that's what's kind of created the opportunity for a lot of us to do, for our family to kind of do the things we do.
Fantastic.
Yeah, but it was great. It's one of those things that honestly, given the opportunity, I think it's important for people to take advantage of the things that the opportunities that they have.
Yeah.
Right, and do something with it.
Yeah,
there's a couple different paths you could take there.
Like, I think maybe a sickness or maybe it's a gift, but being passionate about doing business in general, and the cool things that people are doing and want to participate with them, and in a way it's chasing shiny objects, but in another way it's just being a creator.
Yeah,
it's just like that, the opportunity to create and to hire people and to help other people, have success. And like you say, you put these key people in places, and yes, ideally you want to also benefit from that, but you love to see each one of these people benefiting from what they're doing, and creating opportunities for employment for people is also very rewarding.
Yeah, and the fact is, honestly, Chip, not everyone has that.
Yeah.
Not everyone has that. I mean,
yeah,
very few people do. And there's a lot of people who would say like, I'm comfortable just going into work, punching in, punching out. I'm not taking this home with me.
Right.
And that's fine. That's great.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. But without you got to have a few people who are also kind of, it becomes their lifeblood.
Right.
Yeah.
There's
no separation for me between
me neither.
life and work. I mean, it's all the same thing
for sure.
Yeah.
Or like it's a great thing too. Like it's a gift, and it keeps me going and energized and doing new things. Of course, there's ups and downs and everything, and some days you're like, crap, man, why can't that just work?
Right.
Or why did so and so quit on me with not even telling me?
Yeah, it's highs and lows.
Highs and lows, right? But it's the highs that make it worthwhile, and it's great being an entrepreneur, and it's good to talk to someone else and be able to collaborate and look at synergies and understand what has been success with other people. And so, congratulations on everything you're doing. And
thank you.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Super inspiring to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'd love to hear more another time. And
so we're going to do this show again up at Hula when you come to
Part
visit
2.
it.
We're definitely going to come to Hula, and
Yeah.
I'm going to come be on your podcast.
Yeah, there we
hopefully.
go. That's what we're going to do.
We're going to get a little
That'd
bit
be
more
awesome.
information, and I'd love to learn more about Hula and see.
Yeah.
So was there any particular businesses that out of Hula you think that are really interesting that you'd like to mention?
The most talked about story in Vermont, without going into too much time, the most exciting thing right now is this company called Beta Technologies,
Okay.
and they're building an fully electric aircraft.
Wow.
And it's in an industry called eVTOL, so it's electric vertical takeoff and landing. So it has the capacity to hover and fly.
Wow.
And so little tiny Burlington, the founder, right, from Vermont, went to Harvard for mathematics, he's a genius. He left Harvard after 2 years to join the NHL. He played for the Washington Capitals franchise. He goes, Russ, I wasn't a great hockey player, I was a great fighter. He's 6'6", he's got tattoos everywhere, and he...
But went to Harvard.
He went to Harvard.
Okay.
And then after 2 years, he left to go play hockey in the NHL, and he was fourth line D. So they would say, his name is Kyle Clark. So his coach was like, Clark, number 4, go get him. And he goes, my job on the team was, regardless of what number 4 had done, I didn't know this guy, I didn't have any beef with him, but my job was hop the boards, drop my gloves, and beat him up and shift the momentum of the game. And he's like, "That's what I did. That's what he freaking did." And then so he finished his NHL stint, came back to Vermont, and he worked for a power electronics company, and he actually designed and built the Powerwall home battery system that was ultimately sold to Tesla. So he was a battery guy, and he's a really bright guy. I mean, he's a unicorn. We all love this guy. I mean, Kyle Clark is like our hometown hero. He is changing the game in Vermont right now.
Wow.
He's going to build 300 of these aircraft a year out of Vermont. He's building a 400,000 square foot manufacturing facility at the far end of the runway at the Burlington Airport right now. He's raised over $800 million. I mean, this guy is like...
So we're all going to be flying around in these things.
Yes.
This is like...
Yeah, but what's interesting
You
is
heard it here first.
what's interesting is that he's going into the freight logistics business first. So
yeah,
UPS
brilliant.
is one of their first customers. FAA certification right now.
Gotcha.
And so they will... It looks like, fingers crossed, this is my claim, not anyone else's, but I feel very confident that they are going to be the first certified electric aircraft in the United States. And they're coming out of Burlington, Vermont. And so anyway,
That's incredible.
that's the most talked about story in Vermont.
Well, unreal, man.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, congrats on all that.
Yeah.
And, Wind and Waves looks like a really cool shop. The spot, we'll have to come check it all out.
Yes. A couple fish tacos.
Yeah, we're going to definitely. But just thanks so much for coming by. I know you were just
My
zipping
pleasure,
in
man.
the state,
My pleasure.
on a trip, but we appreciate you
perfect.
swinging in.
Yeah, I'm glad we
yeah.
could make it
It's been
work,
great.
and it was nice meeting you. And
Nice to meet you.
yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
I definitely look
Thank
forward
you
to
guys.
visiting you guys up there, and keep me in mind next time you need a extra person for a full trip.
You
I'm trying to
got
get better.
You got it.
It's total coincidence that I got the call last minute from Lance. Hey, we got this spot with these guys, and I'm like, he's like, do you want in on it? I'm like, sure.
Awesome.
So
I'm glad you did.
And then it just worked out. It was very good.
All right,
Very
we'll get
cool.
something on the calendar fast.
Well, thanks a lot for coming, man.
You
Really
got it, Trey.
appreciate
Great
it.
to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
That was good.